What's up, y'all? What's up? So, if you noticed, like last month, I did all Persona openings, and I was telling y'all, like, I have this game on the PSP. It's back there somewhere. I don't feel like grabbing it right now. Too bad. But I was like, I don't know what it's about, right? So let me find the lore of Persona. Let me find the story, the history. Hence the title, The History of Persona, 1987 to 2021. Let's hear how this whole thing came to be. And also, let me know right now if y'all want to see me play Persona, because I checked the PlayStation Store. They actually have a lot of the games. So let me know which one's the best one, and if y'all want to see me play some Persona. So, without further ado, let's get right to it.
The Persona series of video games has been around since 1996,
let's lock in, y'all.
But has a fairly confusing 1996. History. What initially began as a spin-off title from the main Megami Tensei series now spans 2.5 decades, with releases on a plethora of different platforms. Newcomers to the series...
Hold on, y'all, hold on.
Really challenging to
we gotta lock in for real.
His long history and interesting naming schemes. With 6 main series games and a whole host of spin-off titles, the series really is very interesting to look at. My name's John. Join me as we explore the history of the Persona series. The first Persona video game was released in 1996, but our story actually begins almost a decade before this. In 1987, a company by the name of Atlas developed a game called Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei for the PC and Famicom, which is the NES in Japan. This is truly where the series begins, and this marks the start of the Megami Tensei, called Shin Megami Tensei internationally, series of games. Side note, a cursory Google Translate reveals that Megami Tensei translates to Goddess Reincarnation, with Shin meaning new, so New Goddess Reincarnation.
This was
Megami
the first
Tensei
game.
Was, in turn, a video game adaptation of a trilogy of science fantasy books called Digital Devil Story, written by Aya Nishitani. You can probably already see that there are a lot of layers to this whole Persona / Shin Megami Tensei / Digital Devil Story.
So it's like 3 games, like
the first entry in the Megami Tensei series contained many gameplay elements, so it persists through both that and the Persona entries to come later. It features high school students as the main characters, swords and guns as the main weapons, demons to fight or recruit, and a first-person dungeon crawling adventure. The Megami Tensei series had several more entries over the next decade. Digital Devil Story,
fun fact, I've never played any games like this, where it's this format. I know Pokemon is like this.
Respectively, and Kyu-Yaku Megami Tensei in 1995. But it was 1994's Shin Megami Tensei If that was the closest to future Persona games, and that ultimately led to the whole series being created. While earlier Megami Tensei titles saw players traversing labyrinths or post-apocalyptic wastelands, Shin Megami Tensei If had players explore a much smaller scale environment in the form of a high school and 5 towers. The focus on a high school setting was well received by both critics and fans, and was the driving force in creating the Persona spin-off series. Now with that background out of the way, at last we arrive in the year 1996 with the very first game in the Persona series. Revelations Persona was released on the Sony PlayStation on September 20th, 1996
This was PlayStation 1?
And on December 14th in North America. A PlayStation Portable port was released in 2009, or 2010 in Europe, called Shin Megami Tensei Persona. For the sake of simplicity, I'll refer to this game in general
that's better.
as
Persona 1. That's
Persona
cool.
1 was directed by Koji Okada, was written by Tadashi Satomi, and the artwork and character designs were created by Kazuma Kaneko. Persona 1 focuses on a group of high school students at a high school called St. Hermelin High who play a game called the Persona game, which allows them to access their true inner selves, or their personas.
Interesting.
Shortly after playing this game, the town of Mikage-cho becomes overrun by demons, and the group fights their way through the school and across the town to discover why. The story of the first game honestly reads like a fever dream at points, and it's absolutely worth watching a synopsis video on it. As mentioned before,
is that
the
deep?
gameplay of
That
Persona
much
1
layers
is
to
fairly
it?
similar to the early Megami Tensei games. Players take on the role of a mostly silent protagonist, but they can control the other students in the turn-based combat of the game. Dungeons are explored in a first-person view, and battle encounters are random. Various rooms, such as classrooms, are traversed in a rotatable,
crazy jump scares here.
And the style would make a return in some of the games to follow. Combat occurs on small grid-based battlefields, and players are able to change the positioning of each party member in order to attack in different ways. Party members can attack by using their persona's magic skills, by melee attacking with a weapon like a sword, or by range attacking with a weapon like a gun. Players can also choose to attempt to converse with the enemies in an attempt to get free items, or even to get cards that allow the demon to join them as an ally. With these cards in their possession, players can head to the Velvet Room and talk to the long-nosed character of Igor in order to add new personas to their party. Both Igor and the Velvet Room are staples of the series and can be found in every game. Notable by its absence to any fans of later games in the series, Persona 3 and onwards, is the social links mechanic. This was only added in Persona 3 and is a large reason why some people recommend starting with that entry. There were some pretty large differences between the Japanese version of Persona 1 and the North American one.
So there was two versions, Japanese and
North
North American?
Aggressively localized. Think rice balls in Pokemon being referred to as jelly-filled donuts, kind of aggressive. The team behind localizing the game thought that the game would be too Japanese for Western audiences, and either renamed or simply removed many of the Japanese references in the game. Finally, an entire names changed, and one character even be too Japanese for Western audiences, and either renamed or simply removed many of the Japanese references in the game.
So they wanted to make it like more.
Several characters had their names changed,
Western.
And one character even had his
ethnicity black?
Changed. Finally, an entire route of the game that makes up a large chunk of the playtime was removed entirely. Fortunately, the 2009 PSP port of Persona 1 was far more faithful to the original Japanese version, and also added back NB Cut, Snow Queen route. Even though Persona 1 technically had two different names, one was for the original and one was for the later PSP port, so it ultimately made sense.
So there were two Persona
2
ones?
gets a little bit more complicated.
Oh man,
Persona
are y'all brains ready for this?
Entries. 1999's Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and 2000's Persona 2 Eternal Punishment.
I heard of this one, Eternal
Punishment. We'll start
Punishment.
off with Innocent Sin. Persona 2 Innocent Sin was released for the PlayStation in Japan on June 24th, 1999. There was no Western release for the original PS1 version of this game. Confusingly,
Only
the
Japan?
sequel Eternal Punishment did get a worldwide release for the PS1 version.
Okay.
Luckily for fans though, a PlayStation Portable port of Innocent Sin was released in Japan on April 14th, 2011, in North America on September 20th, 2011, and in Europe on November 4th, 2011. Of course, the PSP port had to have a slightly different name, so this was called Shin Megami Tensei Persona 2 Innocent Sin. Apparently, the original release wasn't localized for a Western audience due to time constraints, as well as some concern over how Westerners would react to some of the game's content. Now, what in the game could be so bad that not releasing it in the West would be the preferable choice, you may ask? It's Hitler. The answer is Hitler.
What the heck? He's in the
A
game?
resurrected Adolf Hitler leads an army of Nazis in this game.
Oh
Just
man.
like with Persona 1, it's very worth watching a video recapping this game's story. For Innocent Sin, Koji Okada transitioned to a producer role, while Tadashi Satomi and Kazuma Kaneko reprised their roles as writer and artist respectively. Once again, Innocent Sin tells the story of a group of high school students who attend Seven Sisters High School in Sumeru
Seven
City.
Sisters High School.
This time, an evil figure by the name of Joker is the group's target,
Joker.
as he's caused rumors to begin changing the world in strange ways. The story of the game is praised by fans, and is certainly worth delving into. Gameplay-wise,
So they have good
Innocent Sin
stories?
is very similar to Persona 1, but with a couple of differences. Rooms are still traversed through a rotatable isometric view, but the biggest change is that this view now carries over into the dungeons as well, instead of them being presented in a first-person point of view.
So they got rid of the first
Combat
person
is still
thing?
turn-based, and characters
Too
can all
many
be equipped
jump
with a
scares?
persona for magic attacks, a weapon for melee attacks, and another weapon for ranged attacks. Another big difference in this game is the rumor system. Throughout the game, and by talking to different characters, players can hear rumors about all sorts of things, such as the kind of items a store might stock, or the appearance of a strong enemy in a nearby
That's kind of
dungeon.
cool.
Once the player hears a rumor, they can head to the local detective agency to have the rumor spread about. As a result of Joker's influence on the world, these rumors become true and spread, and have a direct impact on the world around them.
That's cool.
The
I
PlayStation
like
Portable
that
port of
feature.
Innocent Sin wasn't as drastically different as the Persona 1 port was. One notable
Yeah, they really
change
got
was
Hitler
to
in this
rename the
game.
character of Hitler to simply Führer, and to disguise him
Führer.
slightly by having him wear a pair of dark
Bro.
sunglasses. And
They
there was
put
also a
glasses
new quest
on him and
added
just
to the
change his
game that made
identity.
references to Shin Megami Tensei.
That's like when they
If.
put the mustache and the glasses. They come back as a new person.
Persona 2 Eternal Punishment is a
I'm gonna
direct
do that one
sequel
day,
to Innocent
for a
Sin,
video.
and takes place a few months after
Y'all
the
aren't
end of the
gonna
previous
realize
game. It's set in the same fictional town and features several returning characters.
So
In fact,
some
Maya
characters
from the previous
returned.
game is now the protagonist. In a completely flipped situation,
this one
from
is
Innocent
branched
Sin,
off.
Eternal
Okay.
Punishment's PS1 version received a Western release, but the later PSP port did not this time. Eternal Punishment was released in Japan on PlayStation on June 29th, 2000, and was released in North America on December 22nd, 2000. The PSP version was released only in Japan on May 17, 2012. At the time of writing this video, a fan translation project has been in the works for several years, but is still not all that close to being released. It does, however, look extremely promising. All the key players of Innocent Sin reprised their roles in the development of the third game in the Persona series. Koji Okada as producer, Tadashi Satomi as lead writer, and Kazuma Kaneko as lead artist. The story of Eternal Punishment stars the character of Maya from the previous game.
Yeah.
She's a journalist and is assigned a story to write about Joker and a creepy rumor related to him. The rumor suggests that if someone were to call their own phone number, then Joker will kill someone for them. Obviously, as this is a direct sequel to the first half of Persona 2,
why don't we just end it there? Why are we playing with somebody like that?
It's hard to get very in-depth with this story without spoiling the previous entry, so I'm purposely keeping this one quite vague. As you might expect, gameplay is practically identical to that of Innocent Sin, even down to the rumor-spreading mechanic making a return. Luckily, by this point in Persona's history, Atlus was no longer as gung-ho as they had been before about removing Japanese references in the localization process. As a result, Eternal Punishment received a very faithful localization for Western audiences. As for why this entry didn't receive the PSP port that previous games had, still not a whole lot is known. In 2013, Nick Maragos, an editor for Atlus, said in a blog post that unusual circumstances prevented them from localizing Eternal Punishment on PSP, and that's really all there is.
Unusual circumstances.
The often overlooked trio, or quartet, or quintet, depending on which port you count, of games that make up the first two numbered entries in the Persona series. You followed along so far?
Yep. I'm all there with you, bro.
The Persona
you gotta do a
series
pop
was very
quiz or
quiet
something
for much of the early 2000s. A couple of Megami Tensei games were released, but between the end of 2000 and mid-2006, there were no Persona releases.
And then they fell
This all
off.
changed when, on July 13th, 2006, Persona 3 was released on PlayStation 2 in Japan.
3.
The North American release wouldn't come out until a full year later, which was apparently due to production issues with the art book that would accompany the game. It was released in North America on August 14th, 2007, and in Europe on February 29th, 2008. Incredibly, a director's cut of Persona 3 called Fez was released in Japan on April 19th, 2007, almost 4 whole months before the regular version was released outside of Japan. Persona 3 is also when the naming convention began to get a little bit more confusing for newcomers. Having the first 3 entries in the series be numbered 1, 2,
Nah, you had to be there from the
two
jump to
wasn't
understand
easiest
it.
to follow, but there were only a handful of games to keep track of at the time. Persona 3, however, had 3 different versions. There was regular Persona 3 on PS2, Persona 3 Fez, also on PS2, and Persona 3 Portable on PSP. To further complicate things, these
I don't know
games,
which ones I
and
have on the
later ones as
PSP.
well, are often referred to just by their initials, such as P3F for Fez and P3P for Portable. To fans already familiar
that
with
sounds
the series,
fancy and
all the
smart.
different names and abbreviations may make sense, but those new to the franchise had a bit of learning to do before they could begin playing. Directing and producing Persona 3 this time was Katsura Hashino, who previously worked on several Megami Tensei titles. Artist of the prior games, Kazuma Kaneko, this time handed off lead duties to Shigenori Sojima. Yuichiro Tanaka and Katsura Hashino handled the writing side of things. Persona 3 is set primarily in a high school called Gekokan High School in the city of Iwatodai.
Okay.
Players take on the role of a new transfer student who ultimately unlocks the powers of his persona and joins the specialized extracurricular execution squad.
Okay, a new student with some
The
skills.
school turns into a massive tower dungeon
Show 'em
called
off, then.
Tartarus as a result of the Dark Hour, which takes place every night.
Oh no,
The protagonist also makes friends with other Persona users in the SEES. As one might expect, moving over from the PS1 to the PS2, the gameplay of Persona 3 saw huge improvements compared to the earlier games.
yeah, I like that.
Environments
Improvement.
and dungeons were now
We
modeled
love
fully
improvement.
in 3D, and players could control the camera freely instead of being locked to 8 distinct viewpoints from the isometric layout.
It's not
Combat is still turn-based, but it looks
2D
far more
anymore.
detailed than before, and features changing camera angles instead of being locked to one view for the duration of the fight.
Yeah, there we
One
go.
notable
Now
change in
we're
combat
talking.
was that, with the exception of the PSP version, players could not directly control their AI teammates anymore. They're able to vaguely direct them using a tactics menu, but otherwise the decisions were made by the AI.
Oh,
This proved to
brother,
be a
you know
fairly
how
divisive
AI
decision among players,
is.
particularly with those who were used to
AI
the combat
players,
of the earlier games.
They miss every shot.
When combat ends, there's the chance for a minigame called Shuffle Time to begin, which grants players the chance to get extra cash or experience, or even to be given new personas. Like in previous games, the protagonist is able to swap out their chosen persona by speaking to Igor in the Velvet Room. Perhaps the change that stands out the most in Persona 3 is the social links system in particular, and the simulation aspects in general. While the first 3 titles were essentially just JRPGs, Persona 3 combined that with what can really be boiled down to Japanese high school life simulator. Between the dungeon crawling segments, players are able to spend their free time in various different ways, such as improving skills by studying or reading, or spending time with friends to improve their relationships.
Different features outside of
Fans of later games in the series will be familiar with this system, but this was something very different.
So it's like a high school simulator.
Like with Eternal Punishment, the localization goal of Persona 3 was to leave as many of the Japanese references intact. This time, the team took
how long do these games take to beat?
Honorifics at the end of
this seems like there's
names.
a lot to these games.
One reason for being as faithful as possible was to see if the game would be a good way of introducing Japanese culture to a Western audience. Persona 3 Fez, side note, apparently Fez comes from festival, added a few updates to the original game, as well as an entire epilogue chapter called The Answer. The Fez version was released in 2007 and 2008 in Japan and North America respectively, and the PSP port was released in 2009 and 2010. Persona 3 Portable made some additions to the game, but also removed some parts, as might be expected in order to maintain its portability. Players now had the choice of playing as either a male or female character, and this changed some scenes in the social links area of the game. It also adds extra difficulty levels, but does not include the epilogue introduced in Fez. Portable also allowed players to control their teammates in battle.
I like that.
Interacting with the world was scaled back immensely, again to maintain the port's performance on the PSP. Just 2 years after the last entry, Persona 4 was released in Japan on PlayStation 2 on July 10th, 2008, with a North American release following later that same year on December 9th.
Yo, look, he's like me with the glasses. Who does he think he is? He's not me.
In 2012,
oh, this looks good.
The PC port of the Vita version released in the summer of 2020. While Persona 3 had 3 different versions with both enhanced editions having pros and cons, Persona 4 Golden is absolutely the ultimate version of the game to play.
So, is this the best one? Persona 4?
Produced by Katsura Hashino. Shigenori Sojima also returned as the lead artist, while Yuichiro Tanaka and Katsura Hashino were joined by Akira Kawasaki in the writing department. The protagonist of this game is once again a transfer student who moves to the small town of Inaba to attend Yasogami High School and live with his uncle and younger cousin. The main character soon makes new friends at school and learns about a game people have been playing called the Midnight Channel. To play this game, one is to simply look into a turned-off television at midnight when it's raining. When the protagonist tries it out, he's transported into the TV world.
Oh, that sounds kind of cool.
Meanwhile, there's an ongoing mysterious spree of murders plaguing the quiet
buddy.
Town.
There you.
Graphically and gameplay-wise,
I thought it was innocent. Now there's a string of murders
which is to be expected as they were released just 2 years apart and on the same platform. Environments, dungeons, and combat all look and feel very similar, although players now have the choice of either directly controlling their teammates or letting the AI handle it. Dungeons were also treated slightly differently. While Persona 3 featured the single sprawling dungeon that was torturous, Persona 4's
I love
dungeons
games
are split
with
into several smaller
vibe.
ones. The social links and improving skills features, of course, made their return as well.
2000s
Persona 4
games.
Golden was released in Japan on the Vita on June
3D.
14th, 2012. Interestingly, it was originally planned to be another PSP release, just like Persona 3 Portable, which would have meant making significant changes to the gameplay to have it run well on the PSP's limited hardware. It was ultimately released on the more powerful Vita, which not only meant no cuts had to be made, but also meant that new content could be added. Some of the added content included a whole new character, new personas, and a vegetable garden the player could use to grow things in while at home.
Yo, this game is like a life simulator, I guess.
The spin-off titles of the series began in full force after the release of Persona 4, and we'll start getting into some of those now. Persona 4 Arena is a fighting game, as well as the first spin-off title developed in the series.
Oh, I remember that opening.
First released in Japan on arcades on March 1st, 2012, before also being
go check out that opening video.
And Xbox 360 in 2012 in Japan and North America. It's notable for being the first title in the series that's not an RPG, as it is in fact part fighting game and part visual novel. Persona 4 Arena features characters from both Persona 3 and 4, although it doesn't include characters from any of the earlier titles, as I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear. The game was very well received and led to several more spin-offs, including a direct sequel called Persona 4 Arena Ultimax in 2013.
Persona fighting game?
Takes place 2 months
after count me in. I love fighting games.
And features the same mixture of fighting game and visual novel gameplay. The next spin-off title was one for the Nintendo 3DS called Persona
I remember my
Shadow
DS.
of the Labyrinth.
My little brother broke my DS.
2014
that was
in Japan,
so many
and
years
in November
ago.
In North America and Europe. Like the Arena before it, Persona Q also featured characters from both
I used to play on my DS. I used to play
Again,
that
one or two
the Lego games. I think it was Lego Star Wars.
Was a throwback to the first-person dungeon crawling of Persona 1, as it was a mixture of the characters and story from Persona with the gameplay of Etrian Odyssey, another series that Atlus develops and publishes. The game was received well enough that a sequel was released. Persona Q2 New Cinema Labyrinth came out for Nintendo 3DS in Japan on November 29, 2018, and worldwide the following June. Since this title was released in 2018, it also features characters from Persona 5, as well as returning characters from 3 and 4. So far, the spin-off titles have all made a decent amount of sense.
Well, there's so many of these games.
Persona began its life as a first-person dungeon crawler, so the Persona Q games were already quite similar to that. A fighting game may have been a tiny bit more different, but since there's combat in the main games, you can also say it made sense. The next spin-off, however, was very different and very neat.
Oh, is this the dancing one?
Persona 4 Dancing All Night.
I remember the opening to this.
Dancing All Night is a rhythm game that was released for the PlayStation Vita in Japan on June 25th, 2015.
This is so different from the other ones.
Releases later that same year.
What the heck is going
players
on?
control characters from Persona 4 as they dance to music from the game. On top of the gameplay,
oh wait, that's kind of a good idea if it's music from the game.
This might not come as a surprise, but I feel it's important to point it out, as a lot of rhythm games aren't typically
He's kind of killing it though.
Stories. Persona 4 Dancing All Night was well received, and 2 additional games were released in 2018. Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight, and Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight, establishing a tradition of each main series game getting a rhythm game spin-off title.
Why is he kind of killing
Personally,
it?
I'm still patiently waiting for Persona 2 Dancing in Daylight. Finally, a collection of all 3 dancing games was released on PlayStation 4 in 2018.
2018.
After a string of spin-off games, the next main series entry, Persona 5, was released for both PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4.
Is this the newest
in
one,
Japan
or
on
is there
September
one
15th,
after
2016,
this?
and worldwide on April 4th,
Actually, I think there's
2017.
more.
An enhanced version called Persona 5
Like,
Royal
it came
was
out
released
later.
on PS4 in 2019 in Japan and 2020 worldwide. Including Royal, Persona 5 is the best-selling game in the entire Megami Tensei series.
Oh, really?
The
Persona
game was
5?
again directed and produced by
Is this the
Katsura
best one?
Hashino.
Let me know which one's the
Shigenori
best one.
Tsujima was joined by Masayoshi Soto in the art department, and Yuichiro Tanaka and Katsura Hashino were this time joined by Shinji Yamamoto as writers.
I didn't know
Persona
there
5
was
took
free
protagonist
roam in
moves to
these
modern-day
games.
Tokyo to live with a family friend in the attic of a curry and coffee cafe.
I thought it was just
He
like,
attends Shujin Academy and makes several friends over the course
you know
of
what
the
I'm
game.
saying?
He and his friends
If you
awaken
know, you
their
know.
personas while
I
in the
don't feel like
metaverse
explaining.
and form a group called the Phantom Thieves, whose goal is to change the hearts of evildoers. Each
Oh,
of the
great
Phantom
guy.
Thieves has their own code
See, I didn't
name
know it was
on the
like this.
metaverse, and the main character's code name is Joker.
Like, I know they say
While
it's
Persona 3 and
turn-based,
4 were
but
PS2 games, the improved technical aspects of the PS3,
I didn't know you can,
and
like,
to a
walk
lesser
around
extent the
freely. I
PS4,
thought it was, like,
meant that Persona 5 was quite a different game,
mostly,
in a similar vein to how 3 was very different to 2.
like,
Players are able to traverse several real parts
like
of
the
Tokyo,
earlier
and are
ones.
even able to navigate subway stations
Like
in
the
order to take
Pokemon
the train
type
to
game from
different
the beginning.
locations such as school. The social link system of prior games returns, although the relationships with other characters are now called confidants to match the burglary theme. Graphics were also drastically improved compared to the PS2 games,
yeah, we know that.
and its art style received extensive praise.
Yo, the art style is
Dungeons,
gas, I'm not
called
gonna lie.
Palaces in Persona 5,
Yeah, I see the art
are
style on
navigated
this.
fairly
I like
similarly
the
to how they
fonts
were in
and,
3
like,
and 4,
all
although
this
they are
right
no longer
here
randomly
and the
generated as
corners.
they had been in those
That's
2
tough.
entries. Guns as ranged weapons also made their return after
got
a break in the
guns now?
previous game. One big change, however, was the return of Persona 1 and 2's
that?
negotiation dialogue system.
See, that's fire right there.
Players were once again able to talk to the various shadows they encountered in dungeons, and were even able to convince them to outright join their team as a new persona. Finally, there was the addition of Mementos, a huge multi-level dungeon that players could take their time proceeding through during the game, and that had various different effects depending on things like the day's weather. The enhanced
Hey, what do you
edition
mean
of
by
the
that?
game, Persona 5 Royal, was released in Japan
What
on
does he
PS4
mean the weather
on October
affects
31st,
this?
2019, with a worldwide release coming the following March. By now, fans of the series knew what to expect with the re-released versions, and Royal was no different. It added several new features, most notable of which was an entirely new member of the Phantom Thieves. It also featured a new dungeon, a new area of the city, and brand new music.
Well,
At
last
we come
one.
to the final, at the time of
Final
writing, entry in the Persona series. Released in Japan on February 20th,
2021.
and
Let me see
worldwide
the
on
newest
February
Persona
23rd,
game.
2021, Persona 5 Strikers was another first for the series. A spin-off
Strikers.
sequel
So
to
it was another
5,
Persona 5.
Only to the regular version though, no royal features are present in this game. Strikers was the first game to feature real-time hack-and-slash combat, as it was a crossover game with the Dynasty Warriors series. The original Japanese release came out on both PS4 and Nintendo Switch, And while the worldwide release came to both of those platforms, it also featured a PC release on Steam.
So Persona 5 is still the newest one.
Original Persona 5,
Persona 5, the Phantom X,
to Tokyo for the summer holidays.
and Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance.
They discover that a shadow world similar to the one from before is
that
available
says 2024.
This time called a jail.
Hey,
These alternate versions of the world is available. The group of friends is reunited.
A shadow
world similar to the one from before is available to them to enter.
Oh, really? I'm not gonna lie, these games actually look fire.
Alternate versions of the world
I want to check them out.
Who's the evil counterpart to someone in the real world. Once again, it is up to the Phantom Thieves.
Let me know if you want to see the Persona playthrough. I can have that up for y'all.
Persona 5 Strikers features vastly different gameplay to previous games, as combat is done in real time instead of turn-based.
I like this right here.
Attacks are performed by pressing various buttons.
I like this.
And different combinations of buttons.
I'm not the biggest fan of turn-based fighting.
Players are still able to equip multiple personas, although the roster is shrunk down considerably from Persona 5. Days are also far more structured in Strikers. Players aren't able to choose who to spend their time with or what to do in chunks of time, but they are able to complete side quests in order to become closer to their companions. And this is a requirement for leveling up skills through the Bond skill tree. In dungeons, players are able to control any of the 4 members in their immediate party they wish to, and so are actually allowed to roam around the dungeons as...
Insert audience favorite best girl here.
The game was well received,
Who the heck is that?
although it certainly was an interesting decision to release a spin-off sequel to a game on platforms that never actually received the prequel title. And there we have it, the entire history of the Persona series,
That's
stretching
crazy.
from sort of 1987 all the
It
way
wasn't
to
even.
present
It didn't
day.
even start off as
Do you have a
Persona.
personal favorite title in
It
the
kind of
series?
just
Have you
happened.
played any of the games before Persona 3?
Let me know which
Let me know in
one.
the comments. So this video was
Right.
something very different for me, but I've been getting more and more into the Persona series recently, so I found myself becoming really interested in the timeline of the games, and this video project here was something that I really wanted to try out. I really hope people enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video and subscribe.
Yep, I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for watching, and I will...
This was a good history lesson. It taught us a lot about Persona. But yeah, I understand a little bit more now. I see, like, it's kind of confusing. Basically, that's what he was saying. But I get it now. So, let me know if you want to see me play it. Make sure y'all like, share, comment, subscribe, all that. And I'm going to catch y'all niggas later.